Get New Yorked.
My mummy makes electric club cars that don't pollute the earth.
My papa makes fridges for trucks that carry lots of ice cream. My daddy makes ACs that keep everybody cool.
My daddy makes clever locks that keep buildings safe.
My daddy makes machines that blow clean air to make other machines work better.
With innovations that make life safe, comfortable, and efficient, we are creating a sustainable future and a better tomorrow. We are Ingersoll Rand, inspiring progress.
You have two options now. Option one, you could rearrange his face. Or option two.
तू बजा तो बहुत अच्छा लेता है, गाता भी है क्या?
What? And when you choose option two, you become a Verito man.
This is Network 18. And you are watching CNBC-TV18.
Hello and welcome to this special edition of Global Insight. Today we speak with Dr. Robert Johnson, Executive Director of the Institute for New Economic Thinking. Now, Dr. Johnson has served as Chief Economist for the U.S. Senate Banking Committee, the UN Commission of Experts on International Monetary Reform, and as MD at Soros Fund Management. A quick word on the Institute for New Economic Thinking. It was set up in 2009 with a $50 million pledge by George Soros to provide fresh insight and thinking to promote changes in economic theory. Well, for a glimpse of what that fresh insight could be, Dr. Johnson, thank you very much for joining us. Let me start first by taking a position that normally news anchors would not take, at least over the course of the last few weeks, as they've seen markets turn volatile every time Germany has decided to hesitate on helping Greece. The question I'd like to ask you today is that the markets may not like it, but Germany seems to have got it right, hasn't it? We can't be solving the sovereign debt problem by continuing to fund bankrupt economies and bail them out, and thereby adding to the very reasons that contributed to the indebtedness to begin with.
I tend to disagree with that perspective. I think that Germany is like an insurance company. When they joined Europe, they told everyone that they were supportive of Europe. And they are like an insurance company that doesn't want to pay after an accident. Now they're trying to get off the hook. I think the Germans made a pledge to Europe. They're already members, and the idea that they're backing away is creating tremendous problems. Having said that, I believe that Greece is basically in default and does need to restructure their debt. But the Germans are not getting it right. The Germans are making it much worse than it needs to be.
What would you prefer the Germans did? Would you prefer that they wholeheartedly, let's say, backed ECB intervention in the bond market that's already taking place, or they backed an expansion, a substantial expansion of the EFSF beyond the approval that it currently seems to have at the 450 billion euro level? So maybe take it all the way to €1 trillion. Is that the firepower Europe needs? Is that what you hope Germany would do?
No, what I would hope Germany would do is stop protecting their banks and French banks. I believe that Portugal, Ireland, and Greece definitely should restructure their debts and obligations, and the banks should take a loss, and the government should recapitalize, or the EFSF or European Community or the countries themselves should recapitalize the banks. I think you need to acknowledge that this sovereign debt crisis is unnecessary, and you need to acknowledge that it is morphed, it has turned into a banking crisis, and restructuring the banks and stop protecting the banks is the most important policy change that could take place by, making them restructure those debts.
What you're saying is, to me, seems seemingly contradictory. So please explain, Dr. Johnson, why you think on the one hand Greece should go in for a default, and why you think on the other hand Germany should stop doing or stop opposing all the other measures that are being taken to prevent Greece from going into a default. Because if Greece is already in a default situation, then Germany is well within its rights to say stop throwing good money after bad.
No, Germany is in a place where they're saying that the Greek people or the Portuguese people or the Spanish people should be turned inside out in order to rebalance these accounts. And what I'm saying is Greece has gone over the waterfall. They should default, and the banks, which are private sector entities that made bad loans, should bear the risk on their balance sheets. They should bear the losses on their balance sheets from having made bad decisions. And what's happening, whether it's the enlarged EFSF or whether it's policies to, bail in all of these peripheral countries, they are all being done to protect the banks at the expense of the citizens in those countries.
All right, let me focus a little bit. I'm not trying to make the case for Germany in any sense. I was just trying to see if there is a debate to be had here between a longer term or a medium term, more viable, healthier option as opposed to a short term fix. But let me now shift the conversation to focus on the consequences of a Greek default, so to speak. Many people believe that, well, maybe, Greece, there is no way to avoid a Greece default, but there are good chances that the consequences of that Greek default could be even beyond what happened when we let Lehman fail, a few years ago. What do you think the consequences are going to be, and how damaging will it be, not just to the financial system in Europe, but financials across the world?
I believe that Greece, which is no larger than the state of Nevada in the United States, if they default, will set a precedent that shows what you might call the dysfunction of the European system, and people will become more suspicious of Portugal, Spain, and particularly Italy. And if Italy starts to be questioned as to whether they will remain solvent, and certainly the rise in the Italian interest rates suggests that's ongoing right now, we could see a contagion of the size of Lehman Brothers or beyond throughout the world. Our international banks are very, very poorly regulated. They are not transparent, and none of us have any way of knowing, because of derivatives instruments like credit default swaps, who bears the loss. So it's like a musical chairs game where somebody turned the music off, but nobody knows who's going to have what chair. As a result, the entire world's financial system can freeze up. So I think the risk of Greece in isolation, like I said, the size of the state of Nevada is not that great. But Greece propagating into Spain and Italy can create a world crisis.
Then why are you saying that we must allow for Greece to default if the risk of contagion is so high, and if it could ultimately mean a freezing up of the global financial system?
I say that the Greek default that I recommend must be accompanied by the equivalent of a bank holiday, where they honestly restructure and recapitalize the banks that take the losses, meaning the creditors to the Greek, the people who own the Greek debt that is written down. I think if you do it in that way, the system will be better, and those peripheral countries will be better in a hurry. I think if you do not do restructuring of the debt, this crisis will deepen and spiral down, and it will take in Spain, Italy, and the others. Now, in listening to your question, I understand that if you let Greece default and you don't properly recapitalize the banks, you can create a world banking crisis. The tension of this episode is how the political power of the banks in Europe will be resisted to do something for not only the European but the world economic system. European banks, particularly French and Germany, are just too politically powerful.
So who would you expect would need to recapitalize European banks, especially those that hold sovereign debt burdens, in order for this to be, let's say, a less disorderly default and maybe a more ring-fenced orderly default?
I would say you could do it either where the German government takes responsibility for the bailout of the German banks, the French government for the French banks, and go country by country, though that creates the question of what will happen to the Greek banks. Or you could do a system-wide bailout that would be the European Union through the EFSF, but that would in some level be a socialization of losses, but how would I say, not entirely, because if you did it as a recapitalization, existing stockholders who do bear responsibility for the risks that were taken that turned bad would be wiped out.
All right, so what you're saying is that there is
EFSF...
Go ahead, Dr. Johnson, go ahead.
I was going to say the EFSF does have capital, and that could be used to inject into the banks after the restructuring. and it might actually need to be enlarged if you restructured debt from Italy, Belgium, or Spain. But for the peripheral countries like Greece, I think you could do it with the existing capital. I think that quantitative estimates, I'd say it's well within their means.
Would it be fair for me to then understand that the solution you're proposing, in a sense, is no longer to continue bailing out Greece, but allow the banks to take a haircut on Greece and then help bail out the banks?
What I'm saying is we cannot afford to continue these mad policies of austerity. Greece does need to collect tax revenue, and Greece does need to cut spending. They are excessive. But we cannot have system-wide Europe austerity policies because they don't even reduce the deficits, because they drive down activity, they drive down tax revenues, they drive up what do you call the automatic stabilizers, and that madness is not going to produce progress, and that madness is going to deepen the insolvency of banks. So to relieve that stress, you can only do one of three things. You can do austerity, you can do inflation, or you can do restructuring. And I'm opting for restructuring, which means the banks have to acknowledge and come clean with their losses and be recapitalized.
All right, I'm going to ask you...
That will put things back on a stable basis.
All right, I'm going to ask you one extra question on Europe before I move to your views on the US. In what term of time, in what period of time do you expect this restructuring to take place? And here's my question, sort of it's linked to all the events we have seen unfold over the last few weeks and months. Do you believe that this is a medium-term solution, and that is that in fact we can continue to push the can down the road for at least about the next 1 year whilst all these measures are put in place, for instance, to be able to recapitalize banks, and then allow this to take place, that is, then allow a Greek default to take place? Or do you believe that no matter what we wish, a Greek default is likely to happen much, much faster?
I believe that a Greek default will happen much, much faster, and I want to be clear for your viewers. I am not predicting that the process will produce the restructuring. I am saying that's the policy that I believe would be best and healthiest for Europe and the world economy. I believe the banks are very politically powerful, and it will be very, very difficult, in fact, to create the political conditions for the kind of solution that I suggest.
What then will take place if it is not the solution that you suggest? So we end up with a Greek default over, let's say, the next 3 or 4 months. What happens if banks are not recapitalized? Are we inevitably hurtling towards a financial freeze?
Well, what I think right now is the kind of policies that you suggested in one of your questions, an enlargement of the EFSF or a European Investment Bank, where they use the capital of the EFSF to lever up and create a bigger bailout fund to bail out the banks and socialize the losses across all of Europe, which the German people do not like. But the German banks and German corporate power may decide that that's what they feel is the best of a bad group of options. That kind of bailout I could see as more likely than a proper restructuring of the bank debts. Furthermore, the European Central Bank, which has bought a lot of this debt, wants to avoid a restructuring because of the embarrassment of losses on their own balance sheet. So I expect to see the enlargement of the FSF include the transfer of the bonds that have been repoed and are on the balance sheet of the ECB to be moved away from the ECB, so when the losses occur, no one is critical of them for their role in monetary policy.
All right, no matter which solution is adopted, Dr. Johnson, it seems to me that Germany and France will willy-nilly have to pay for all the misdeeds of the peripheral countries, all the overspending that they have done, whether we like it or whether Germany and France like it or not. What is that going to mean for Europe over the course of this decade? Is this going to be a lost decade for Europe? Because if the two countries that are on a reasonably solid footing in Europe are going to have to bear a bulk of the burden, it could end up impacting the balance sheets and the growth rates in those two countries as well, and then Europe sinks.
I want to differ a little bit with how you present the question. German banks made lots of loans. French banks made lots of loans German and French people bought lots of properties in those peripheral countries. German and French companies sold lots of goods in all of those countries. This is not about profligacy in the South and holiness or prudence in the North. That is a very wrong way to interpret what's happened. The Germans are huge beneficiaries, and now that there's an accident, they're trying to export the burden of adjustment onto the peripheral economies. Greece itself was excessive, but the European system involved excesses emanating from the core of Northern Europe as well as in the Southern Europe. It was a dance that they did together.
If you need me, call me, no matter where you are, no matter how far. Just call my name, I'll be there in a hurry. You don't have to worry, 'cause baby, there'll be no mountain.
There's a force at work across the world, helping businesses of all sizes grow to achieve their potential. That's the speed of yellow. DHL Express. Excellence simply delivered.
Smarties, comfortable 3D glasses. Smarties, turning 2D to 3D. Smarties, simple control. Experience the smartest 3D. LG Cinema 3D Smart TV.
यार, I need a new laptop. Laptops और boyfriends बदलते रहो.
पका मत, बोल किधर से लूं?
Try Flipkart.com. Online. Original चीज चाहिए बॉस. Original products with original warranty. Warranty? Who told you? My boyfriend. Oh, Kabir. Handsome कहाँ है आजकल?
Original products with original warranty. Flipkart.com, the online megastore.
Nice car.
Thanks. It has green efficiency.
It's called blue efficiency, darling.
They look as ghosts, wandering through the city, a question unanswered. Where to hang out tonight? Burp shows a place, still open. Salvation. They find a map with a guiding voice. But is it too late? It's back, guys. No, they cannot sleep yet. Being young, it's not as easy as it looks. Smart apps on Nokia smartphones for life's epic dramas.
Can a bank really stand for something? Can it balance